We believe that people-centered and action-oriented research has a crucial role to play in shaping resilient futures for everyone. And we launched this Adaptation Research Alliance a year ago at COP26. And we're really delighted to be back here today to tell you about our progress. So I'm going to hand over to Jessie de Maria Kinney, head of the Secretariat, who's going to give you a bit of a run through those highlights, and then I'll join you back at the end of the session. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rosalind. And hello to everyone here in the room and everyone also joining virtually here at the Resilience Hub. It's my pleasure to present a bit of an overview, as Rosalind said, of the Adaptation Research Alliance activities that we've been covering with our members over the past year. And to do so, I'll use this presentation, maybe just position myself a little better to see it. So first, I'm just going to pull from this one slide here, but really just provide an overview of what we have been doing. First, to let everyone know, to find out more information, we have a new website, www.adaptationresearchalliance.org, that has just gone live just a couple of days ago. So we've been working hard at that to launch it here for COP27. What will also be coming linked to that website is actually a members area. And this members area will allow the 157 ARA members to come together to really have just conversations, share information and experiences in a members-only space that's actually a part of a way that we can increase the tracking, learning, and sharing amongst our ARA activities, which is actually what you see on the last bullet point on the left there, the TLS component. This is actually one of the activities that is the next part over at the top, tracking, learning, and sharing. What we have been doing there is working with our members to have them come together to share experiences, particularly along two areas. One of them is on the learning and sharing, and to do that, we've been bringing together about 30 members to have conversations around the area of understanding climate risk, as well as bridging adaptation, action, and research, which of course is contributing to this session here today, as well as another session we have in the morning on the 12th looking at urban risk. And this is really bringing together the members to share some case studies, share their own experiences, and then discuss them about best practices and really how they can learn from the experiences and from one another. Then we also have a tracking part of the TLS, and this is where members have come to put out some action statements, and where behind the scenes we're working on a type of outcome mapping to really see how ARA members are working together to fulfill their goals as well as the ARA's overall goals and outcomes. Moving along. Something that I'll touch on a bit more is that we're looking here on the top right where it says funding, and this is something that we are following up on. Last year we had ARA microgrants that have come to a close, and this year we're pleased to announce a second round of the microgrants, which are now the ARA Grassroots Research Action microgrants. I'll get to that in just a moment. But moving down, we have two other areas that we really have been focusing on over the past 12 months. One is getting a co-creation space up, live, and running with working with members, key funders to really come together to work towards 4 new co-creation spaces and programs. We have an event on the 12th of November at the UK Pavilion, so please come to that if you'd like to hear more about these co-creation spaces. We've also just carried out a consultative process on local finance and adaptation, which you'll hear more about here from my colleague here, Victoria, in just a moment. And last but not least is our engagement in UNFCCC processes. And this will be, well, this has been some activities contributing to the global stocktake. That also we have a poster session, I believe it is on the 9th, which will look at our contribution to the global stocktake, where we've worked with members to really get inputs from the ground of activities that are happening with grassroots organizations and other community members to really see what they're actually doing, feed that up into the global stocktake processes. We've also engaged in the Loss and Damage Conference that was held in Glasgow this past year, and the idea is also to do something similar where we work with ARA members to really bring these voices from the ground into the conversations about evidence, knowledge generation, and understanding better these critical areas and these UN processes. And then, of course, we have a list of COP events, which you can find on our website, also on social media. And again, this is really just a bird's eye view, but please do check out the new website at www.adaptationresearch.org for more information on that. And with that, what I would like to do is to pass over. Sorry, I forgot to actually go through the slide. So this is looking more at the microgrants themselves, which, as I said, we will be going into little more information on this after we hear from our colleague Victoria. who'll be presenting on the BASE initiative. So maybe before I pass over to Victoria, just a little bit of a bio here to introduce her. And let me find the right one. Here we are. So Victoria, my pleasure to pass over to you. Sorry. There we are. And Victoria Matsuvic coordinates the BASE initiative, which I'll let her explain what that is. But it's driven by Fundación Avina and supported by the Skoll Foundation. And before joining Fundación Avina, Victoria worked as a consultant on sustainability and climate change issues for the public and private sectors. She's developed environmental impact assessment and sustainability strategies and has led verifications of sustainability reports. And from 2018 to 2020, Victoria coordinated the Climate Readiness Project in Argentina that was funded by the Green Climate Fund. So with that, I'd like to pass over to Victoria to hear a bit more about the consultative processes and BASE.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for being here, and thank you, Jesse, and all the ARA staff and members for inviting me to join this panel. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share some of the results of this consultative process that we have organized with ARA and BASE. BASE is the short for Building Approaches to Fund Local Solutions with Climate Evidence. This is a new initiative that we in Fundación Avina are promoting along with other partners and associated initiatives with the idea and the strong belief that if we want to talk and promote climate justice, we need climate finance to reach the local level. But doing so implies a new way of embracing things and enhancing simplicity, speed, and climate rationale for the resources to getting in the local level. So being that said, and giving you some context about BASE, let me just jump in to share briefly some of the results of this consultative process that we have done together with the ARA. So the consultative process, its name was Financing Locally Led Climate Resilience, and it took place from August to October. And during these 3 months, we've interviewed 27 experts. We've held an important literature review of this, regarding locally led adaptation, climate finance, different sources to promote and to demonstrate climate rationale. And also we developed 3 workshops with 94 participants in the whole. And of course, we have a steering group that help us throughout the process with different experts from sectors and regions from all over the world. So what we wanted to achieve with this consultative process was mainly 2 objectives. The first one was forming a network of different stakeholders, scientists, local governments, public sector, private sector, communities, researchers that are in this world of trying to change the way that climate finance actually reaches the ground, specifically related to resilience projects. And the second objective was to explore the challenges and the opportunities for framing locally led projects with climate impact. So very briefly, then I can go back to you, Jesse, and then we can deepen in the results of this consultative process. Just wanted to let you know that we started from the idea that there are a lot of challenges when locally led projects want to access finance. And one of these challenges is related to developing a climate rationale. We'll talk about that later, but this was the focus of this consultative process. So we started by asking ourselves, why it's important to develop a climate rationale? What is the role? What is the purpose? What is the information behind to provide evidence of and develop a climate rationale. And then in that specific matter, we studied two main sources of information: climate science and traditional knowledge. And I don't know if we want to jump in the conclusions right now, so I can go deeper in the next part, but what we wanted to understand are, okay, we know that climate finance has many challenges. As I was telling you before, climate rationale is one of them. And after these interviews and reading literature and these workshops, we came out with 5 ideas that are breakthroughs, proposed recommendations and suggestions to break through the climate rationale challenge. And these 5 main opportunities and recommendations are regarding building and strengthening trust, information on impacts in people's lives, that is regarding like how information is provided to the people that is being impacted by climate change in a useful way. The third is related to the importance of strengthening local capacities and governance. The fourth one was promoting the use of ICT. And finally, facilitating access and use of data. But I can come back and share more about that later.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Victoria. Yeah, as you can see, we could have had a whole hour today just on BASE or the consultative process or the ARA, and probably 1 year actually on the climate rationale. But thank you very much for that. We'll get into a bit more detail, as you said, once we move to the panel discussion. What I'd like to do now is go back to one particular area of the ARA activities that I'd mentioned, which was the microgrants. And as I had said, last year we carried out microgrants where we had 25 microgrants of £10,000 each over a period of about 6 months of activities to bring together organizations to work in transdisciplinary groups towards identifying burning adaptation needs and issues. So that has come to a close, and after a round of feedback and conversations with many of the grantees, we've gone ahead with a second round. And this second round for microgrants, as you can see here, is we really are reaching out to action as well as research entities to work together in these transdisciplinary collaborations, with the idea to identify knowledge needs, ideas, and opportunities for adaptation, and this is particularly focused on the Global South. So the second round of microgrants, what we have done is we've kind of maintained this same idea, and what we really want to do is to bring together diverse groups of these stakeholders to co-create these understandings of issues that are affecting their communities, their work, their lives directly. We very much see that this, as I'd said before, oh, sorry, I'm gone ahead there. We very much see this as a way to actually become an enabler and a catalyzer for activities and for additional longer-term projects. What we are doing here in the second round of microgrants will be opening up grants of a 6-month period for activities. There'll be, of course, open and closing, but the 6 months is just for the activities themselves. And based on conversations with the grantees from the first round, the amount will be increasing from £10,000 to £15,000 sterling. And one of the most important things to highlight here is that the eligible grantees are organizations based in developing countries in the Global South from either research or action. Of course, there can be partnerships with organizations in the Global North, but we really want this to be driven by organizations who are looking at the needs on their grounds. On the ground. So the second round is live now, and the deadline is the 12th of December. So please do go to the website that you can see on the board, on the screen. I've said it a few times already, so I won't say it again now. But please do apply, please do share amongst your networks, and we really look forward to getting in a second round of grantees. And again, this will be about 30 grantees coming together for these ARA microgrants, and in this case, the grassroots research action microgrants. So it's a really exciting initiative, and it's something that many of the grantees and many other organizations working with the ARA who've not been grantees themselves have been very excited about the first round. So we look forward to keeping up that momentum and that excitement for the second round. Now, we've had a lot of talk about, I guess, some of these initiatives, some of these activities, but what we really want to do is kind of hear from a panel, but also hear from you as well afterwards about what this really means as kind of local finance, bridging adaptation, action, and research. And, not necessarily in these massive initiatives, but how can actually small pieces come together, to really contribute to global processes, but also effective adaptation on the ground. With that, I would just like to move on to the panel discussion. And I would like to introduce our panelists. One of them you've already seen, heard who she is and heard about, which is Victoria. So welcome back, Victoria. And then we have two other panelists here. First is Dr. Johannes Atella. And Johannes, welcome. Johannes is the convener of the Africa Research and Impact Network, or ARIN. He's also a senior research fellow and head of the Climate Resilient Economies program at the African Center for Technology Studies, ACTS. And since 2016, Johannes has transformed the climate programs at ACTS to become one of the best in the world, ranking third globally and the best in Africa, according to the 2016 International Center for Climate Governance think tank rankings based on research and policy work. And he's led the design and implementation of several DFID, of course FCDO, funded projects from small, medium, and large scale projects across Africa. And he currently leads a team of 10 early career researchers under the Climate Resilient Economies program. And a part of his work, of course, and ARIN, is to really build these vast networks for research excellence and policy transformation. So welcome, Johannes. And then we have Dr. Anand Patwardhan, or professor, rather. And Anand is, of course, the co-chair of the Adaptation Research Alliance. He's a professor in the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland, College Park. He's been a coordinating lead author for the IPCC and a member of the Scientific and Technology Advisory Panel for the Global Environmental Facility. And he currently serves as a co-chair of the Science Committee of the World Adaptation and Science Program, or WASP. And he's also co-chair of the Executive Committee of the Global Energy Assessment and as a member of the Steering Committee of the Program of Research on Vulnerability, Impacts, and Adaptation, or PROVIA, of the UN Environmental Program. So welcome, Anand. It's a pleasure to have the three of you here today. And we have a few questions, again, of course, on this subject of bridging adaptation, action, and research, but also really looking at what this local finance can mean to this conversation. So I'd like to first start with you, Johannes, and then maybe after Victoria to you. But when we talk about bridging the gap between research and action, based on your experiences, and Johannes, you're part of one of the ARA microgrants as well, ARIN and other organizations. We'd really just like to hear about your experience, in this microgrant kind of context from last year. I guess we need the other microphone, but I'll just pass this over to you for now.
Thank you very much, Jessa. Really glad to be here to represent the African voices. My name is Johannes Atella, as has been said. I'm the convener of the Africa Research and Impact Network, where we bring together more than 200 researchers and policymakers from across 36 African countries, and with the aim of consolidating the African voices based on evidence. Evidence and data in Africa is relatively scattered. That is a story we all know. So we try to bring together different experiences from the different parts of the continent and be able to profile that at the global level. So it's with that we worked with the Adaptation Research Alliance to be able to bring the micro-grantees that were supported by ARA to share lessons in terms of what are the things that are working, what are the challenges, what are the gaps, and what are the opportunities. And I want to, first of all, take the opportunity to thank ARA for investing in profiling the grassroots voices, because that is fundamental. in terms of promoting leadership and resilience, especially for vulnerable people. 3 key lessons that we've learned. So we are supported about 14 micrograntees in Africa, which is massive, which very interesting lessons that have emerged from their work in terms of their implementation of the different grants in the different ecosystems. 3 key lessons that we've seen. Number one is that the local communities are really very heterogeneous in terms of the adaptation situations, the adaptation needs, aspirations, and the risks that they are actually facing. But for a long time, research has really treated this local community as one ball with really no clear insights into the different aspects or the differentiations within these particular communities. So, by and large, in terms of the research that has been was being implemented by these communities, one of the key challenges that was coming out was ways in which all these voices within these local communities can be articulated and can be supported and measured. So that becomes a major concern, and it is an evidence gap that remains or needs to be given attention moving forward. Number 2 is that despite the fact that there has been a lot of work trying to profile community voices, there are over, in one of the microgrant project, we mapped over 700 tools that have been used to kind of assess the risks and adaptation aspirations of this local community. But one thing is that these tools are developed by different projects. So a project comes, they develop a tool, they implement it with the communities, another one comes. So thousands of projects that are working with these particular communities to develop frameworks or tools for assessing their risks. So the outcome of this is that communities are really confused. They don't know what to say. They don't know what it means. There is no single framework that they actually can align to in terms of profiling their voices and linking those voices to the policy spaces. So this is a major gap, and this is something that I think ARA, together with partners such as the network I'm part of, we can think about how do we create a framework that is really capturing all these voices in a very consolidated way. And finally, I think one of the other lessons that is emerging is that there's a lot of work going on, a lot of projects working with these communities, but the outcomes and lessons basically remain at the community level where these projects operate. So in this case, there are no platforms, there are no frameworks through which the experiences and best practices that these communities have can be tracked into the policy space. So once a project comes, they work with the communities, outcomes are documented, reported to donors, but they are poorly linked to the, for instance, NDC reporting. So this means that the visibility of some of the innovative adaptation actions that are taking place in this local level remains really very weak, and again, is something that we can work together to profile and create those frameworks. Thank you very much. I'm happy to interact further.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Johannes. No, okay, now it is. Yes. Thanks. Yeah. No. Okay. Great. No problem. We'll just adapt. No, thank you very much for those points. I think we'll definitely touch on some of those again as we continue here the conversation, but definitely proliferation of tools, as you said, was one point, and the other is really this lack of experiences, moving upwards, which I think was the next one. But Victoria, I said I want to come to the same question on this idea of the gap between research and action. And the consultative processes that you just shared when you're really looking at financing, look at locally led climate resilience. What did you see as the biggest barrier to this climate rationale that you touched on? But
Thank you. I'm going to, no, the other way, just to here. Great. So, as I was sharing before, we focus in this consultative process on understanding the role of climate rationale in developing proposals. Perhaps many of you know that traditional climate funds, like the GCFs, like the GCF, ask the proponents when presenting a proposal to develop this climate rationale of the proposal. So basically, what is a climate rationale, or what we understand by it? So the idea is that the proposal can demonstrate that the activities that are going to be implemented actually address a problem that has been caused or will be, or we have consequences specifically regarding to climate change. So it's not development issues, but climate change issues in particular. So there are positive sides on developing a climate rationale, but there are also challenges. Climate rationale may prepare locally led projects for a changing climate and assuring that the project that they are going to implement effectively addresses and gives solutions to mitigate or adapt to climate change. But the downside of developing climate rationale is that it usually takes a lot of time to develop. It is really resource consuming and time consuming, and perhaps capacities, especially at the local level, aren't there, at least at the level that the GCF expects. So just to give you an example, I was reading the results of a board, the last board's, the results of the board of the GCF number 23, and they were saying that about 21 proposals were presented and only 11 were rejected. And from that number, almost half of them were rejected or not approved because of the climate rationale was not being strong enough. And what happens with that? There are many challenges when local communities want to develop the climate rationale, and especially regarding the availability of information. And that leads us to the other part of the process that we were looking into, that is, what kind of information is used as evidence to demonstrate and develop the climate rationale. So in the consultative process, we identified mainly two: climate science and traditional knowledge. Both of them have opportunities and challenges. And what I will want to share, like a main conclusion, is that both of them have to work together because they complement each other. Climate science gives us information about the climate, specifically in one region, in the present and the past, and that information is used as input to including in projections and in climate models to project future climate scenarios, and it's really useful for creating these future scenarios that lead us to better adapt to these changings, this change in climate that we know that will happen, and the ones that will change along with time. But climate science also has many challenges when obtaining this information, especially regarding developing countries and developed countries. And this implies, for instance, that developing countries do not have access, at least at the scale of information that is needed for developing a climate rationale. And obtaining this information often implies like looking back like decades ago, and developing countries do not have that kind of information. And of course, the continuity of that information perhaps is not present in communities in the Global South, for instance. Another issue that appears as a challenge regarding climate science is the availability of that information. And that implies that not all the information is publicly accessible, and that the information is obtained and obtained and gathered and managed within different organisms. So it's not centralized and easily accessible for regional or local for local communities to access and use. And the other source of information is traditional knowledge that for many years hasn't been given the same space and the same credibility as climate science. But as we understood in the different interviews and the workshops, can provide really useful and important inputs and insights that not only complement the climate science, but also can give specificity of the information, because the people have been living there for many years, for many decades, let's say, and they have been observing climate because their livelihoods, their economy depends on that. So as one of the panelists of one of the workshops says, it's a matter of survival. So it's really important that we acknowledge that information to at the same level as climate science. But on the downside, of course, there are some challenges that relate to the lack of possibility of traditional knowledge to project future climate scenarios that are important to better adapt to this this changing climate. And the fact that the format, perhaps in the way that traditional knowledge is presented, may sometimes sound like anecdotal. So that perhaps hinders the importance of this source of information.
Great, thank you very much, Victoria, and thank you, Joannes. You really highlighted, I mean, in both different ways, kind of an evidence base that is there, right? I mean, this through the consultative processes, through the experiences, the empirical evidence, the microgrants, and the activities. And one of the things that the ARA does is, one of the function areas is really work towards advocacy. And one of the things that we advocate for is involving those on the front line of climate change to co-create, let's say, new programs towards new solutions and really co-creating it with people on the front lines. So this actually goes to Joannes first, and then over to you, Anand. What benefits have you actually seen from this approach? This co-creation, this co-design with people on the ground, with communities or those doing the work?
Thanks. Many benefits. Everybody today in the scientific field talks about co-creation and co-production. But one question as I go into the benefits is, what does co-creation mean? What does it entail? So fundamentally, that is one of the, things that a lot of us have been struggling with. And it's a question that remains clearly answered. A number of people think co-creation is about bringing communities together, tell them what you're doing, they ask questions, you respond. That's fundamentally not co-creation. It's deeper than that. So first of all, the starting point to understand what are the principles of co-creation, especially when it comes to adaptation and local, is very important. When done right, a number of benefits accrue. Co-creation is actually a way of strengthening the capacities of, various stakeholders engaged in a process, for instance, local communities. Because when you are engaging in co-creation, for instance, we engaged with local communities in one of the microgrants, implemented in Nairobi with the informal settlements in Mukuru. So we established these platforms called the Adaptation Labs, where basically communities are able to really define what the problems are and what actually the solutions and the research solutions should be, and then engage in the process of producing the knowledge, understanding it. And one of the things that we realized is that it leads to a lot of empowerment among the community members. Some of these lessons that I've shared around communities feeling a bit lost and requiring some consolidated frameworks to be able to engage with in terms of adaptation are products of co-creation because they begin to really unpack their capabilities, their strengths, their innovations, and the gaps that they experience. So it's very important that co-creation be done in a proper way, and that leads to learning and, by doing and capacity building. It's very important, finally, that co-creation is one of the ways through which the research that happens at the grassroots can really get traction into the policy spaces. It's one of the ways of profiling voices at the policy spaces in a way that basically, creates leadership within these particular frameworks. Now we are talking about the global goal and adaptation, and it really, on the ground, there's still a lot of struggle in terms of trying to profile those voices. So strengthening co-creation, enhancing fundamental principles of co-creation, testing them and implementing them over different contexts is very important towards really supporting a more bottom-up and grounded global goal, of course, national processes, but also the global goal on adaptation. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and just very quickly, because I think it builds very much on the global goal, our contributions, the area's contributions to the global stock take. I know that we've actually engaged practitioners on the ground, so maybe you want to come in on that.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. So just a couple of quick observations. As you would have noticed from Jesse's overview presentation, the ARA is really trying to bring together the sort of the research to action domains, right? And this requires actually a fundamental change at both ends of the spectrum. So in a sense, we are really through, for example, a set of principles that we have developed or related to adaptation research for impact, trying to change the process of research, how we do research, how do we conceptualize it, how we implement it, and do it in a very different action-oriented way, right? So that kind of requires a fundamental change on the research side. But also, I think, requires a fundamental change on the action side, which is to make sure that action is much better evidenced. It's supported by the right kind of evidence. It is supported, it leads to learning because, again, when we think about action in the context of adaptation, it is not a one-time activity we have to do. We have to do it as a process over time, which means we must embed learning much more firmly in the process of action itself. And so I think, as you would have seen from the overview that Jesse presented, that becomes also a theme of some of the ARA's activities. The second question that you say, when you say, okay, we want to bring research and action together, where is action happening? Right? So a lot of it is obviously happening at the local level. And so we have seen some really good examples of microgrants and locally led action where we are bringing these communities together. But action is also happening right here at places like the COP, at the processes at the UNFCCC level, which are really important in setting often the context and setting the way we think about adaptation and providing guidance to entities like the GCF. So Victoria talked about the processes and the procedures of climate finance like the GCF. So equally, we need to figure out how to bring knowledge and research to inform action at those scales as well, right? Into the multilateral process, into the UNFCCC process. And I want to pick up a point that Johannes made earlier, which is really important, which is one of the, I think, unique features of the ARA is the ability, or at least our potential ability, to connect across these scales. How do we take our experiences and the really rich perspectives and contextual richness we are getting from things like the microgrants, but how do we then take that and bring it up so that it becomes visible into processes here that seem, often you look at the negotiating processes and they seem sort of oblivious to the realities of what is happening at the community level, right? So really making that connection across scale and feeding those perspectives into decision-making at those different scales. So what we have been trying to do in the ARA is figure out how can we as a Adaptation Research Alliance engage with some of these more global processes. And so as Jesse mentioned, we have been working, for example, with the global stocktake process, which is, I think, a really important venue for bringing these voices and perspectives more visible. So we made a submission. We have made a couple of submissions to the global stocktake where we have tried to look at not just what we should be taking stock of, and oftentimes what we have to take stock of are not just the outcomes, but also the actions we're undertaking. So sort of the idea of process metrics. How do we develop these metrics? And so Johannes' point about co-creation, that these metrics should really be developed in a co-created manner. So that's been, again, a point we have tried to bring up in our submissions to the global stock takes. We've been engaging there. We've also made a submission in the global goal of adaptation process, where again, we have tried to look at across our membership. So we have 157 members, and that really reflects a diversity of actors all the way from community-based organizations to universities to UN agencies. So again, how do we capture the views from those into that conversation on the GGA? So we are trying to sort of make sure that through our submissions, through also our direct engagement in some of these processes, make that linkage become much more apparent. So that's, I guess, a very quick response to Jesse, your question.
Great. Thank you very much, Anand. Thank you, Johannes. I just have one last question to Anand to follow up, and then Victoria, before we go to the audience here. So I'll just stand here, but if I can ask also just for brief responses so we can get to the audience. You know, part of this conversation is also about finance, and local finance for adaptation resilience is still one of these huge challenges, both in negotiations here probably, but also on the ground and what's happening in the communities. So maybe just, again, how does this kind of research to action linkages link up with this local finance?
Thanks, Jesse. So just two very quick points, since I think we all want to hear from you all as well. So the first is, in the finance conversations, we have had lots of conversations around mobilization, right? And so we, for example, have this whole process on a new collective quantified goal. A lot of that focus on mobilization. I think perhaps not as much on the question of actual delivery and utilization. Is the money going where it needs to go? Is it getting there quickly enough? And is it actually leading to the kind of change you want to see? Right? The whole question of effectiveness. So I think some of the work that Victoria talked about in terms of the climate rationale, some of our microgrants work, I'm hoping will really inform this question also of delivery and utilization. How do we make, even as we work to mobilize more resources, how do we make the resources that we have actually get out and get to where they need to be? And that's a challenge, because moving resources to the local level is not a easy task. And I think this is where we really need to do. The other piece then, of course, is on the whole question of effectiveness. That is, how do we then figure out that resources are being used effectively for doing, sort of getting us ready for potentially even more transformative actions in the future. And that, again, I think raises a lot of questions, not just on the metrics side, but also on sort of the structures we have in place to understand what effectiveness is. Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you. Well, I'm just very happy to be in this panel, because I realize once more how aligned the ARA and BASE are in this matter. So if you're seeing me checking this out, I just want to show you that this is a postcard that we had a drawer made for the last workshop of the consultative process that summarizes the main findings. So please, all after this presentation, you can have one to have along and remember what were the main challenges, and have the complete document if you want to download it. But apart from saying that, I just wanted to mention a couple of things to complement what Anand was just saying. And something is, of course, related to the locally led adaptation principles, that is regarding flexibility, simplicity for finance reaching the local level. So what am I trying to say with this? In the first place, is regarding trust. So perhaps donors or traditional funds like the GCF expect local communities to give a traceability and an accountability of the funds being mobilized that local communities are not able to provide in the way they expect. So how can we propose other ways to demonstrate that effectively the solutions are being implemented as well as the activities, and not asking local communities to do something that they are not used to? So for instance, instead of asking them to provide invoices and receipts for showing every dollar spent, how if we, for example, ask them to provide signatures of the local leaders or photographs of the implementation of activities? And what happens to, also regarding trust and accessibility, when local communities want to access and put a proposal to consideration with, in such of these traditional funds? The thing is that oftenly these formats are very complex, and we have to present or propose new ways. For instance, videos that reflect the project proposal, that explain why the activities are going to make an impact on adaptation or in mitigation, or audio transcripts, or different ways that are not the usual templates, are usually written in English and have and usually take a lot of time and resources to be completed. So basically, I just wanted to share that with you. The conclusions are really powerful regarding of the opportunities that we have ahead, and that as BASE we want to keep on researching and putting into practice, because as Anand was saying, and this is the same for BASE, we want to learn by doing. So what we want to do is implement different tracks of grants to effectively understand what happens in the local ground, and how do we make more resources reach the local level more simply, quickly, and without forgetting the importance of developing a climate rationale.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you, Anand, and thank you, Johannes. And with that, I'd like to pass over to Dr. Rosenwest to close us off and some final remarks.
Thank you so much, Jesse. And those two events at the IDFC Pavilion and the UK Pavilion will be on the 12th of November. So hopefully some of you can stay and join us then, because that will be the, the Adaptation and Agriculture Day. So, this has been such a fantastic session. I would really like to thank our speakers, Victoria Matusevic and Dr. Johannes Thalers, and then of course Anand Patwardhan and Jessie de Maria Kinney. Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us and really demonstrating the complementarity of these three different approaches. I think we've really heard a lot about that today. Jessie, you reminded us that there's going to be a second round of the Grassroots Action Research microgrants, and the deadline for that is the 12th of December. So do get your applications in for that opportunity. We're going to be talking a bit more about the co-creation spaces that are happening under the ARA. We've got some very exciting plans there, so there's going to be more on that on the 12th of November event as well. And of course, the launch of the new website, which is really great. We've been looking forward to that for a while. So that's adaptationresearchalliance.org. It was great to hear from Victoria, about the BASE initiative, and particularly this need for climate finance to reach the local level, and the necessity of flexibility and simplicity in the mechanisms that enable that, but also, of course, the role of evidence to inform that access to climate finance, both and the need both for the climate science evidence and the crucial role of that traditional indigenous knowledge in putting that into context, and with the real specificity of the knowledge and understanding there as well. And then it was great to hear from the ARIN project, again, on this key role of evidence. And Johannes really called upon the ARA to help to develop a framework to provide clarity and guidance through this maze of tools that's appearing. And, perhaps called on us all, I think, to work together to consolidate our efforts and to draw them together into a platform. And then, we really heard a lot from Anand and his wisdom from working with the international processes, and really looking at those, examining those links and strengthening them between research and action. So, you know, I think it's been a very interesting event, and it's been great to hear from all of you. You know, we really can build this resilient future together, and I think we really believe we can do that across this research and action spectrum, forge new partnerships, share our successes and our failures, and build on those, learn from each other's experience, and be working in parallel, you know, to address these challenges with the urgency that's demanded by the science. We've built, through the ARA so far, a very dynamic and energized network. It's been a lot of fun. And we've had some very constructive, very uplifting conversations through our ARA 60-minute sessions that happen every month, through our workshops, through our different projects that are happening. So, you know, we would really encourage you to get involved with us. We've got 157 members of the Alliance so far, and we would love for you to join us. So thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you once again to the speakers, and thank you very much to the Resilience Hub for giving us this space. Thank you.